Hello, hello. What does it take to lead an institution in a way that people don't just visit, but feel they belong to? Today, I'm in conversation with the extraordinary Joe Hill, Director and Chief Executive of Yorkshire Sculpture Park in the UK, and formerly the force behind Towner Eastbourne's transformation into one of the UK's most dynamic cultural spaces. From winning Art Fund Museum of the Year to hosting the Turner Prize, Joe has built a reputation for shaping institutions that don't just show art, but root it deeply in people, place and possibility. But this conversation goes far beyond titles and accolades. We talk about what it really means to create cultural spaces that people care about, so much so that they protect them, claim them and see themselves inside them. Joe shares stories of artists whose simplest ideas became the most powerful, why overcomplicating can kill a commission, and how trust, real trust in artists, is still one of the most radical acts an institution can make. We also get into leadership, the kind that isn't about control, but about creating the conditions for others to think, take risks, and occasionally fail. Because without that space, nothing new can actually happen. This is a conversation about stewardship, risk, generosity, and what it means to build an art world that people don't feel excluded from, but part of. I hope you enjoy hearing how much Joe cares about art, artists, people, and place as much as I did. Welcome to the Extraordinary Creatives podcast. So great to have you here. Would you do us the honour, Joe, of telling us where you're coming from today and how would you describe what you do to someone who's never encountered your work before?
Hi, Kerry. That's great to be here this afternoon. So I'm coming at you from the office in the Towner Art Gallery in Eastbourne on the south coast of England. Funnily enough, a little office that was designed, I think, as the cleaning cupboard. Then it became a very, very small and impractical staff room. And then in COVID, we made a bigger staff room for everybody, and I eventually inherited the cleaning room cupboard. But I have a beautiful view out of the window of the South Downs, which keeps me sort of sane in this what is a funny triangular shaped room. If you were looking the other way, you'd have that sort of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory small door at the back end. But what do I do? So, it's interesting. So I'm director and CEO of Towner Art Gallery in Eastbourne, and that traditionally, I suppose, would have been a sort of custodian role of the collection here of 5,000 artworks and the programme of exhibitions and education and engagement that we put on. But I think what I've tried to do with the organisation in the 8 years that I've been here is to think about what the role of an art gallery and institution like Towner is in a place like Eastbourne. And really thinking about how we step outside the walls of the institution, how we play a role in shaping place for the future, how we think about driving, a cultural conversation forward, but also a social and political, in some senses, conversation forward about the town, pride in place, and where people want to be. So we've ventured from being an art gallery into developing a new site up in a farm complex on the top of Beachy Head, which is an ongoing project. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that. And then we're also working in New Haven down the coast a little bit, developing creative industry investment there and thinking about setting up the first creative opportunity zone in the southeast in that town there. So it's quite hard to define it really, because I think the nature of being a director of an institution for me feels like the institution is the hub point at which other things sort of circulate around it, and how you can sort of build different sorts of relationships with residents, visitors, stakeholders, that mean you're playing a sort of larger role than simply just a sort of cultural institution.
Sounds like you've moved from being a custodian or a gatekeeper, which I'm less keen on that word, although I think people like to assign it to people, more of an initiator and an instigator and a kind of a motivator in some way.
I mean, I've had a lot of experiences in my career that have shaped, I think, the thinking that I've done. So I've worked in a London gallery institution in Camden Art Centre. I've worked in public art in the city and around, actually in Derby, near where you are, Kerry. I did some public art in Derby. And then came out into Essex, was invited out to sort of work a bit at First Sight in the early days of First Sight sort of coming into being, and sort of watched some of the challenges that institution had of sort of landing in this community and having a sort of difficult birth into that space. And then was lucky enough to work in Southend for Focal Point Gallery, which has actually meant I was working for a local authority, which was a totally different perspective and helped me to sort of see the other side of the fence, really, in what local authorities needed from a cultural institution that they were supporting and they were funding. And became very interested in those sort of larger scale institutions that all popped up around the millennium. So Turner, Hepworth, First Sight, and Towner was one of those architect designed, sort of culture-led regeneration models that had sort of arrived in Eastbourne. And when the job came up, I thought, what a great opportunity to come and try some different ideas, some of the things I'd tested in Southend, some of the things I'd learned in Colchester and in London, and get a chance to think differently about what these sort of architectural monoliths could do, really. So that was the sort of shaping of that journey into Towner.
Great. Well, we're definitely going to come to a bit more about how things panned out. But I think so that we can understand the roots of where things started, could we rewind a little and maybe tell us a little about the experiences that shaped, or your influences that shaped your kind of approach and what pulled you to arts and culture?
I grew up in West Yorkshire, so I grew up in a little town called Batley in West Yorkshire, which is, it's quite a deprived part of the country, and was quite lucky enough, I suppose, to have a sort of teacher mother, really, who was quite keen. Her father had been an artist and been interested in art and sort of always was quite pushing me into a more creative focus, which I think could have been quite easily overlooked in that community, really. And then I was really lucky to go to a brilliant sixth form college in Huddersfield called Greenhead College, which had this most amazing art tutor called John Standeven, so I did A-levels there. And he and the atmosphere he created in the art room there, which was a sort of social club of brilliant artists, was just one of the most electric experiences. And strangely enough, we haven't touched on it yet, but I'm leaving town and going to run the Yorkshire Sculpture Park in West Yorkshire. But that was very close to the college, and we used to leave college and go up there, and we'd spend the whole afternoon sort of wandering amongst what was a much smaller institution back then. But so sort of my first experiences with contemporary art were at the Sculpture Park, which is so nice to sort of come full circle in that career. But so he was an absolutely huge influence and actually stopped me going down an academic route. I was due to go to York University and do sociology and philosophy, but I actually, because of John, stopped and did foundation in Leeds. So at the very last moment, changed my mind and managed to, get myself onto the foundation course in Leeds, which again was a remarkable foundation course, run by Sean, and I can't remember his surname now, but Sean Kane, I think it was. And it was this huge building in the middle of Leeds. It was full. I think it's about 150 people on the foundation course there. And I met a lot of the artists and creatives that I still know that are in and around the sector. Some of them came from Greenhead to Leeds and went off. So, I mean, that was my introduction into going to art school. And I ended up going to Middlesex in London, partly because I wanted to go to Goldsmiths, but because it was one of the only courses that didn't make you specialise into a particular way of making. I didn't get into Goldsmiths, sadly. And Middlesex was the other university that had a fine art course that didn't make you specialise into sculpture, painting, or 3D, or into 4D media. So I ended up coming to London to go to Middlesex University, and actually some of the tutors there equally were as inspirational and have helped me to sort of access the art world in a way that has been transformative for me. But quite early on, I knew that I wasn't cut out really to be an artist. I didn't enjoy the solidarity of being in the studio alone and having to make work. It didn't suit me. And in the end, my work became a sort of program of I ran an illegal bar and an illegal cinema, and everything was social and everything was about gathering people. So quite quickly started, and one of the tutors there, an artist called Jefford Horrigan, said to me, you should be a curator, really, or you should think about a curator. But at the time, didn't really know what that meant, didn't know what it was. And this was before the time of internships and sort of serial internships. He introduced me to Jenny Lomax at Camden Arts Centre. And so I went to Jenny and said, would you consider an internship? And she said, oh, we don't really do internships. It's not something we've ever done. But actually, one of our curators is leaving. So if you want to come and get some experience and support us while we're in between, then come on in. So actually, I was able to then sort of come in at a point where they really needed somebody to sort of step right into shaping an exhibition. And I've never really looked back. It's been a journey from that point of I got completely hooked on working with artists and helping realize projects with them and thinking about how you shape ideas spatially and getting a thrill from audiences sort of enjoying it and coming in and taking different things from it. So I felt that sort of pushed me into the curatorial world and which is quite sad for me, actually, because I thought it was the making side of it I might come back to at some point, but I've never done since, really.
It's interesting, though, because I think most people that I know that sort of retain artists at the forefront of everything they do when they become curators or directors, the grounding as training as an artist kind of really helps,
Absolutely.
And that sort of understanding of what it's like to be inside an idea rather than just display it, I think really makes a big difference. There's so much in there, but I wondered, when you were at Leeds, was Griselda Pollock there still?
Well, I was doing the foundations. That was at the art college. Griselda was at the university, but we crossed paths, actually. The two of us were, I'm a big fan of Griselda. I think she's fantastic. And we were on the board I was a trustee for the Tetley for a while with her. And we got to know each other a bit. And I'm a big fan of Griselda. I think she's fantastic.
Yeah, well, I wondered also, just because picking up on the sociology and philosophy, that you were thinking about sort of studying, and interesting how that kind of permeated your thinking about how you excavate people and place in your work. So it seems that interest is still there in many ways.
Yeah, and just to come back a tiny bit onto the point about an artist training as a curator, because I think it's a really valid one. The one thing is, about being in an idea, but the one thing that I always took was the absolute petrifying fear of showing your work. And it was, whenever you would put a show together or be in an exhibition and you would be at before the opening, the absolute dread of that moment stuck with me right through, and always has. So I know the emotion that the artist is going through, or group of artists are going through in the development of that project, and then coming through into delivery. And I think a lot of curators sometimes don't nurture and support and understand. Everyone's very in the moment of delivering the project, and the challenges and the practicalities and the safety issues and the everything that goes before an opening. And we do a walk and talk for the whole staff. And I think, my God, if I was the artist, I'd be thinking it's the last thing I want to do right now, Yeah. But actually understanding what it means to put yourself out there and show your work for me, that was huge. That was a sort of, I don't think a lot of curators have experienced that. And I think if you have, you work with an artist in a really different way.
I think, there's going to be a lot of listeners falling in love with you right now, Joe, because they'll be like, I feel seen. I really understood exactly what you mean, because actually that the fear of it is enormous. But also, I think in relationship to time, how people experience developing a program with an artist, I think very often they don't factor in the time for somebody having that emotional journey. And so when deadlines are put in place, but actually the processing of emotion and idea is an enormous part of it. And
Absolutely.
Many curators I know kind of fire off tons of questions and kind of, that actually is something that helps their anxiety, so they know what's happening, when it's happening, etc. But they don't factor in the person receiving that and also trying to come up with the ideas. So I love the fact that you touched on that.
I try and say to the curators here and anybody I work with, our job is to nurture this project out of this person. We're not just throwing this together with them. It's sort of we can shape and help. And so many curators, I think, also don't feel the ability to sort of question or sort of have a conversation with an artist about something, about their work, and help shape it into the best thing it possibly can be. Because that one person will have their idea, their vision, but actually sometimes another voice coming in and helping to translate that and quite often, I'm always amazed artists are showing in so many different types of spaces, and sometimes I have to have that conversation with artists here that says, a project space is a very, very different space to a large scale public museum. And the sort of audience you'll get in that space and the sort of behaviours and audiences you'll get in this space will be incredibly different. And you can't make the same assumptions of that engagement with the work that you can in these different spaces. And I think quite often we're having to translate that into artists in a way that helps them to make the best of the project. Because you're sort of thinking, well, actually, you may have, in one day, 2,000 people walk through this space. And that's a real consideration to how they're going to experience the work and how they're going to navigate that space. Because if it's difficult to navigate, and I remember, I won't mention the name, but there was one artist that had a real activation to their work that was going to happen. And she said, I want it to happen on a Sunday morning at a particular time. And I said, I think that she had a whole curatorial rationale as to why that was to happen. And all the curators were saying, that's it, it's going to be like that, there's no way around it. And I had the conversation with her and I said, it just feels a bit ungenerous to the audience. She said, well, they'll come back if they want to see. I said, they won't. They may only be here for that day. They may only be here for that hour. But there's a generosity of work with an audience that, and she said, no one's ever said that to me. I completely understand. And let's do it twice a day or something. It happened right. And it was brilliant. And it just, the response was fantastic. There was this sort of fixation on the conceptual underpinning of the work was this.
Yes.
And then it just took a conversation that was about what does it feel like to be an audience coming on a Tuesday afternoon and they read that this thing happens once a week and they can't get back here. And, what does that feel like for your audience?
Yeah. I think it's such a great point, Joe. I think very often an artist has so much to think about, and for various reasons they can think about.
Absolutely, yeah.
They can be thinking about protecting an idea in a way. And sometimes that's because they haven't been given clues from the context in which they're working in. And so they think that they have to preserve the integrity of an idea. They have to think of all the things. Yeah. And I think there are other ways of expanding integrity, and the depth of engagement is the one thing that the artist and the curator has in common.
Exactly.
Which is really like, how do we help somebody access the meaning of the work in the most powerful way? And that can be display mechanisms, that can also be lighting, it could be the height we put something, it could be where it is in relationship to the door, the access point. There's so many different things. And the people who know those spaces well can bring that to the table and add that. So the artist comes with some kind of generosity to the people they're working with. But as you said, it goes the other way. So it's brilliant that you're working with your team to also bring that generosity to the artist in that actually making it clear this is how we can help. I was struck by what you were saying, because I've obviously been in commercial galleries as well, and taking artist work to art fairs overseas, and also biennials like the Venice Biennale. And my goodness, audiences behave so differently in art fairs and biennials, because biennials are over, like the Venice one, obviously, is over months. So the amount of health and safety and kind of rigorous planning and testing required for that context totally shapes the work in a different way. And so the nuanced conversations aren't just logistical. It's like, what happens when this starts getting degraded? And audience do the weirdest things, don't they? Sometimes
absolutely,
you just can't believe what a human wants to do to an object.
It's unbelievable.
It is unbelievable.
I've seen everything, I think.
Yes, likewise. So I wonder, thinking of engagement, I guess, I wonder, could you share an example of an artist or an encounter with an artwork that really shifted your thinking about what could be shown or discussed or preserved within an institution?
I'm thinking about this. I think that there's a couple in there really that have sort of stuck with me, because the thing I try to do here, sorry, I'm not answering directly, I'm going a bit around the houses, but never mind.
No, that's
when you come into an institution, for me, it's all about, how does that walk through the door make you feel? How do you feel entering a building like this? And therefore, I try not to focus in on individual programs, because often that it's a sum of a complete experience that generates that, as you called it, vitality, or the vibrancy of what art can do in a place like Eastbourne is to be transformative in a way that feels aspirational, like pride, that is a space like no other in society or in our community. And so there's a couple that have shaped me, and it's actually back to Venice. I remember going to see Mike Nelson's British Pavilion piece, and Mike is the master of transforming people in spaces and making them feel amazing. And I remember just entering his labyrinth of Turkish and sort of Middle Eastern spaces and sort of courtyards, and opening the roof up on the middle of the British Pavilion and having that central experience, and just the combination of the sort of spatial experience of that work, and I can't remember its title, sorry, but and the sort of craftsmanship and workload that had gone into producing it was, I mean, it was a joyous experience in the middle of Venice to be transported to another part. And I think Mike, I've been lucky enough to work with him, and I think he's such an inspiring artist in how he takes the viewers on a journey. And quite often these examples that I come up with are people that I've worked with, because you become so close to it. And I think people like Elizabeth Price, getting to work with her in Southend on one of her works, was to see the dedication and the process that she took into the edit of the film, but then into the space, and how much of her she put into the creation of that environment. And every bit of the visitor journey, from the audio level to where they were seated, on what they were seated, how bright, dark it was, and she has an ability to take people with her moving image work into a completely different space. And I think I'm sad at the moment for the art world, because I do think that we've lost some of those larger experiential works. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I think the market's got something to do with it. The market's driven a real change in the sort of work artists feel they can make or want to make. But also there's a financial implication. I just don't think institutions have the budgets they had to create those moments around the millennium. And it comes back to those buildings, the architectural buildings, and what they were designed for. Was I think that was a particularly exciting moment for an audience to be discovering contemporary art.
Brilliant examples. And I think there is a real clarity of intention in both those artists, isn't there? And the kind of the editing process, I think, is really an excellent choice in terms of that's given me a kind of visual in terms of you thinking about those choices for the museum, you know, where things get placed, what colour things are, you know, how the lighting is, you know, all of those things that make it a friendly atmosphere, but also a place that you want to hang out or to be in and to be open in. So it strikes me that kind of the edit, which is such a hard thing for an artist. I work with artists every day, and, you know, the edit is such a big topic of conversation because it makes or breaks the experience for the audience. So I love that. Also, I'm really interested in what you said about the risks of working with artists in that way, because I think there was a lot less paranoia about health and safety. But I think it was the coral reef with Mike Nelson, wasn't it? And do you know, I mean, whether or not that work would be allowed to be produced in the same way, I doubt it very much, you know. So there's some really interesting elements, but the experience of high quality thinking is, in a sense, what you're involved in, isn't it? It's in the wider scope of the work that you're doing, is how do we give people access to the highest quality thinking that helps us think about what it is to be a human, think about what it is to be on our place. So let's think back to the beginnings of you arriving at Towner. As you've intimated, you're about to leave. But let's talk more about that in a moment. So when did you first arrive at Towner, and what did you first walk into? Could you paint a picture for us as to what kind of
Absolutely. So I started here in March 2018, and I remember the sort of, you know, being at Focal Point. That was a gallery in the middle of Southend, actually based in the library, the public library there. So it was a contemporary art programme, quite a small space, fairly small team, delivering sort of really interesting programmes that was sort of emanating from the estuary in Essex. And the job came up here at town, and it was sort of, you know, it was a museum with a collection. I'd never worked with a collection before. And it was one of these institutions that had sort of come out of that millennial moment of sort of New Labour and, you know, Tate, Nick Sirota, that whole movement of sort of culture-led regeneration. And it's fair to say I arrived and the organisation was in a bit of crisis. And I think I was very green, I suppose. So I probably now might be more aware of the position of the organisation. Maybe I wouldn't have taken the job. But it just had a major cut in funding from the local authority. I think a third of its funding from the local authority had gone. And you know, the organisation was coming up to its 10th year in its current building. It's actually 100 years old in a different building, but we were coming up to 10 years in the new building. And I think it was quite clear that it still hadn't grounded itself in place, and it hadn't found its audience fully, and had sort of oscillated. It opened in 2009, and it had taken a sort of small museum with a collection really focused around mid-century, 20th century British artworks and exhibitions, and it had catapulted it into contemporary art and opened this big monolithic building with huge installations and big gallery spaces. And I think audiences had found that difficult, and it had been too big of a jolt. And then, you know, the programme had lurched a bit back into mid-century British, and maybe you might say in a slightly panicked way. And I was coming in at the moment of sort of trying to rationalise all that and find a vision going forward. The team were brilliant, and it was quite clear we had a very skilled and fantastic team. And it was a moment, I think, in time where the organisation felt like it was in such crisis. I mean, the stakeholder relationship was awful. The councillors and the council officers wouldn't even come across the threshold. The relationship was so negative. And so I had to very quickly set about rebuilding those relationships and working with the team to shape a vision that would reinvigorate the organisation and find its place. You know, so we wanted to ground it in place. So we changed its name, first of all. So it was Towner Art Gallery, or what's called the Towner Contemporary Art Museum or something, I think. So we changed it to Towner Eastbourne. So we had the name of the where it was immediately in the place. And then we set about thinking, what to do with the space. I mean, I remember the building's an incredible building, designed by architect Rick Mather. Beautiful gallery spaces, not brilliant on offices and toilets, let's say, but he's quite known for not being great at toilets. But there was this very strange sort of approach to the gallery, because I think people thought that people come from the seafront and approach the front of the building, but actually a lot of people were coming from the town centre and coming from the station, and therefore you approach the building and the first thing you see is this huge white sort of castle-like structure that you have to navigate along the side of, and it sort of towers over you, and it always felt a little bit like, for an audience member, that was already too much and too daunting and a little bit sort of diminishing if you were a visitor coming in, and then you would eventually find your way into the building. And whilst the staff have always been amazingly friendly and welcome, everything was monochrome. All the furniture was black, all the walls were white, everything was monochrome. There was no colour anywhere in the building other than in the artworks. And some people would quite agree with that. That's what art galleries should be like. Personally, I felt that it was quite an impenetrable space, and it wasn't a space that felt like it was the most warm and welcoming for a visitor. So we did a lot of work around thinking, what's the purpose and why are we here? What's our vision, mission? What are our values? But we also talked an awful lot about what's the atmosphere? How do we create the atmosphere that we want in the space? And it was really interesting. Not long after I arrived, we were talking about the centenary, which was due in 2023. And I said, well, let's not start with programs. Let's not start with artists. Let's not start with exhibitions. Let's just talk about what we want people to feel in that year. Is it about looking back and really going back into the history? Who cares about the archive of the building? And, I mean, some people do, and the question was, do we make a book? Do we create 100 years of Towner in a book? And you think, there's probably about 100 people that would be interested in that. But then other than that, what everybody wants is a fantastic celebration. The atmosphere needs to feel vibrant and exciting. And that's where we ended up sort of going out to work on getting the Turner Prize for that centenary year, bringing it to Eastbourne, changing the perceptions of place, thinking really differently about, God's waiting room. That was the thing I heard when I got here was, welcome to God's waiting room, everyone would say, because this retirement community atmosphere. And actually, when you spend time here, you realise that's completely untrue. But there is this sort of perception everywhere that it's a sort of retirement community. And so, we had to show people that it wasn't, in a way. We had to use the organisation to demonstrate. But I'm going around the houses. But one of the first things we did was to say that great big white wall outside, that has to change. We have to do something. And I remember we had an opportunity. So I'd been to the council and I'd done my whole okay, I'm here now. We need to rebuild this relationship. And I said to them, what do you need this organisation to do? And they said, we've never been asked that. And I said, what do you want from it? You're investing in it. You built it. What do you want it to do? And we had a long conversation about, okay, it has to change. It has to bring visitors in. It has to change the profile of place. It has to drive change. Interestingly, with the political makeup here, this council don't look after social care, education. It's the county council that does that. So they said, well, we're not actually that interested in the education bits and the learning. We're interested in place and shaping place. And that was them being really honest with me and saying, we need visitors in this town. It's a tourist town. We need it to bring people in. So one thing I said to them, luckily we had a building site next to us. They were renovating the theatres next door, and the building got quite dirty in that process. So they said, we'll pay to paint the building after the construction site closes. And I said, well, could we, in between that, could we have a bit of fun, and could we commission an artwork to go on the outside of the building? And then a year later, you can paint over it with white, and we'll go back to the original plan. And they said, well, we don't see why not. And that was the first thing that I commissioned, was to do Lothar Goetz's artwork on the outside of the building. And we did it as an open call, which was incredibly brave when I think back now. That could have gone horribly wrong. But we had some great artists submit work, but actually not many, because the profile of Towner at the time wasn't as strong as it is maybe now. And we didn't have a huge amount of submissions, but luckily Lothar proposed the most amazing artwork, which you may not have seen it, but he used the sort of architecture of the building to shape this beautiful coloured geometric space, which did something beyond taking an artwork and just putting it on a building. It actually transformed the building into an artwork. And I remember I received lots of letters and emails from people saying, how dare I do this? And it was, it was totally inappropriate for me to destroy this iconic building with an artwork. And I thought, oh my God, I've got this job and I'm going to lose it really quickly on the back of this project. But instantly you could see people were gathering and taking pictures of it, and community groups were coming and having their photograph taken outside it. And he thought, okay, I think we might have something here. And then it just exploded, and absolutely everybody loved it. It went around the world on Instagram, and my favorite was when people would bring down their modified cars. So every night at about 7-8 o'clock, when it was a bit quieter, people would bring down their sort of souped up cars, and they'd all be photographing them in front of this artwork. And then the sort of local scout group turned up and had their image, and he just sort of instantly thought, okay, we've made some pride here, and we've built something that breaks down this huge white block of a thing that people thought wasn't them. And one day, one of the team was in the high street, and some group of teenagers said, "Where's this building?" And they held the phone with the colours on it. And that was just great, because it meant that it didn't matter that people didn't know what it was or what was inside it. It just changed the relationship with the community overnight.
Yeah.
And then we had this, you can't take it down, you can't remove it, it has to stay. So, we've had it now since 2019. So we've had it for 6-7 years. And we're talking with Lothar about refreshing it, because it needs a bit of refreshing, and carrying it on for longer, because it's just the most amazing symbol of how this organisation has hopefully transformed its relationship with its community.
Yeah.
And that built the bedrock. Sorry, go on. That built the bedrock.
No, I think it's such a brilliant example, because all our listeners will get to see an image in some of the clips that we share, but also encourage everyone to go and have a look, because I think it's a brilliant example of an artist spotting an opportunity to do something that they actually already do in lots of different ways. But to use that as an opportunity to do something a little bit new. So their practice was expanding into, a public realm way, but in a really beautiful way. And I've seen Lothar's work over the years, and he's a fabulous person, and, just a delight to work with. But, seeing his work go viral in that way has also, I no doubt, created more opportunities for him too. Because it's gone all over the world, but actually, I think, if I'm not wrong, Joe, I'm sure you've had lots of people asking you about the process and inspiring lots of other people to commission works. So I love the fact that you shared the fact that it felt like a risk at one point.
Oh God, yeah, it did.
But also, in a sense, the idea, the artist, and the intention was so clear, and it worked so beautifully. But it's just brilliant when art starts getting owned by the people that it's for.
We had endless conversations about when somebody graffitis it or when somebody tags it. And touch wood, never have we had anything, nothing, not even a scratch. We accidentally drove a cherry picker into it, but we will leave that. But nobody's touched it and graffitied it or damaged it. And And that just shows you that if you get an artwork really right, people feel ownership on it. And Lota's like a celebrity here now. I mean, he comes regularly, and people are going up to him and thanking him. And I mean, he is literally. I mean, I'm really surprised if they give him the key to the city at some point, because he is absolutely loved here. They adore him because he's just created this amazing artwork for them that. It's just. It was just for me. It was the unlocking. I mean, his sketch for the commission. This is something really good to know, because the submission was quite interesting because it was done at the last minute, and we created a sort of bad drawing of the building. I think it was slightly inaccurate, and everybody had to put sort of ideas onto the shape of the building so we could see what it might. And Lota just did a crayon sketch using crayon, and we've got it in the collection. It's a beautiful little drawing, and it was so simple, and it had no complexity to it. There was no CGI, there was no digital render, it was just a very simple crayon sketch of the colours and the shapes and how it would form on the building. And it was just beautifully simple. I mean, just no complexity to it, and no added. I mean, it obviously taken him time to do it, but it was lovely. I mean, it's one of my favourite things in the collection now, is that little crayon sketch. It's beautiful.
I love that. I think it's such a good point for artists listening. And I often tell artists that one of my favourite proposals that an artist ever submitted when I used to run Grisdale Arts with Adam was Bedwyr Williams, who I went on to do Venice with. And he wrote, it was just tell us a bit about what you'd like to do if you came into residency. And it was like, I think it was like one sentence or a long sentence that said, I'd like to come and make a pair of size 13 clogs with a local shoemaker. And I thought, that was it.
You got it.
Exactly. And I just thought, I'd like to see that.
Yeah.
And I think that, what I think we're trying to share here for people listening is that actually trusting the artist's vision, but the artist bringing it alive, where you can see the sort of the playfulness of the artist, the artist touch, but also you leave some of the imagination to the people who are receiving the idea. Because you don't have to dot the I's and cross all the T's to get it right. It's just that kind of, that spark, and people who are receiving it will be able to unpack it.
I think there was a slight negative side of the project, which was that suddenly the council and stakeholders locally thought everything was public artable in the town, but didn't understand. So I spent a lot of time in the years afterwards protecting the fact that artists needed to be paid and the process might take time. And what I learned a lot with that, and a lot happens in public art, is the conversation starts usually with, can we have an Angel of the North somewhere? That's always the conversation with the council and the public art, is where can we put an Angel of the North and where's it going to be? And then you kind of work from there. And what I've learned is to sort of really confidently say to them, the reason you want to work with an artist is because you trust in the creative process, and you shouldn't preempt an outcome if you can avoid it. So set parameters, guide, it's got to be here, it's got to be on this building, whatever. It's got to be made of a durable material. But don't try and converse as a panel or as a set of people about what sort of thing you want. Because actually, that's why we all love working with artists, is because that process, most of the time has the most amazing result. And if it's allowed the freedom to develop in a way that that follows that process, then the outcome is always amazing. So, I'm always saying, just trust them, trust the artist, it'll be fine, and always never lets you down in that way.
100%, but I think there's something in that, Joan, that you've enabled them to trust you. So I'm wondering, for people listening, what tips would you give to people that are trying to build that trust with stakeholders? Like how would you, all your experiences over the years, what's your approach that's actually worked for you more often than not now?
Well, I mean, it depends on the stakeholder, doesn't it, really? I mean, at local authority level, I mean, working out in the regional spaces most of my career, really, I've been attuned to the idea that, I'm going to be working with a local authority who may find some of the things we do a bit alien. I mean, when I first started at Focal Point, the team would say to me, no, they never come. They never come to the openings. They never come and see the exhibitions. And they were really hurt by that. And all of their energy went into trying to get them to come to the opening or trying to get them to come and see the exhibition. And I said, just stop it. They don't care. They literally don't. They don't like art. Some of them do, some of them don't. And that's fine. So you've got to attune your approach to who you're talking to. And actually, if what excites them is, how are we going to get the Turner Prize to Eastbourne, or how are we going to improve, the skills of young people in this town, or how are we going to make 200,000 visitors come to town a year, then they're the things to sort of engage them with. It's sort of like, actually, don't be obsessed with the idea that they have to experience what you're doing. You can actually shape everything around the gallery experience as the impact of the organization more widely. And then you can have very different conversations with those particular types of stakeholders. But I think it's about understanding that only one sort of engagement with a stakeholder, which is, we've put this on, do you like it, don't you like it, is not, you don't have to be that binary about the relationship. It can be that you're almost, I see my role sometimes as protecting the space with which artists and curators can then work. So I can hold the shield around the organisation, which will meet the CEO of the council and we'll talk about, how we manage another stakeholder, or how we bring a significant person to Eastbourne, or how we might connect this business with this person. And then I leave the space for the curators and the artists. And then I sometimes think, I won't invite you to that one, but I will invite you to this one. Because the projects that will alight them. And I think that's the thing, is about curating the stakeholders' experience. And that then allows the space with which you can work with a more challenging practice, or an artist that is doing something slightly different. Does that make sense?
100%. I think there's something about your ability to tune into other people's desires or fears, what scares them as much as what ignites them, and meeting them where they are. But then you both together leverage each other's strengths to create something unique together, which I think is really powerful. And I think absolutely for our listeners, that's why I spend so much time talking to creative people about going deep with less people.
Yes.
Because when you really understand what lights somebody up, and it might not be the same as what lights you up, but actually together you could make something amazing because of that point of difference. So it strikes me that your kind of commitment to getting to know people wholly and accepting what lights them up, I think it is fabulous. So as you're coming towards a close, 2 weeks left in this current role, Joe.
Yes.
I think I'd love to invite a moment to say, what do you feel the most proud of in your tenure there so far?
I mean, there's actually loads. I was thinking about a project that we worked on together, which was Hannah Perry. Because you at Somerset House.
I was.
And I was fairly new here, and we were sort of shaping this, where do we go with this organisation? And I was a big fan of Hannah's work, and you were working with her at Somerset House, and we managed to do a touring project between us, didn't we?
Yeah.
And that did something remarkable for us, because it brought in a work I don't think had really ever been seen at Towner, work like that. And then also the performative element, which was amazing to host that performance here. because the audience was unbelievable. We couldn't fit any more in the building for that performance. And it showed me the appetite for different art forms was here. It opened my eyes, to the fact that, when you start in an organization, there's so many myths you have to destroy. Oh no, they never come. No, there isn't an audience for that. No, that won't work. We've always done it like this. Where's our core audience? You think, the one I love is like our audience, the one I really love, which is like, our audience really trusts us with what we program. That's the word. It's like, our audience really trusts us. And it's like, okay, well, what about the 2 million people over there that aren't coming through the door? Who do they trust? So I do love that one. That's a classic one. But where was I? I'm most proud of. I think the Black Robin Farm project is the one that is hopefully going to leave the most amazing legacy in terms of, coming from an organization that was built for 90,000 visitors, and we're now exceeding 200,000 visitors here. Seeing that amazing growth in interest in arts and culture, and then thinking, for me, it was about, okay, this is a millennial model. This is a 30-year-old model of an institution, and it's operating like that. What's the future model? If we were having that moment of investment now, what would we build? What sort of institution would we build? And we were thinking about this relationship to the South Downs and this amazing chalk landscape. The Seven Sisters Cliffs are just next to Eastbourne. And they're having this global interest in terms of South Korean, Chinese, Japanese visitors coming in huge numbers now to spend time on them. And we were thinking about where the crossover of arts and culture and landscape could be. And some of the stuff you're doing at Grisdale, thinking about where landscape and art interface. And so we were experimenting with the idea of going and doing something out in the Downs somewhere. And at the same time, this trust with the council had got so positive that they had a farm on top of Beachy Head that they were tenant farming, and the farmer was basically saying, look, these buildings aren't fit for farming. I don't really want them in my tenancy, so I'm going to give them back. So I was invited up there by the council, who said, well, we're going to create an education and a walking centre here, and would you put some art in that room over there? And I said, no way. Not a chance we're going to work with you on that. But I said, this site is incredible. It was this beautiful farm that you just literally, I could see the gate from the window here, but you go up this escarpment onto Beachy Head, you drop over the top and into this valley, and there's this beautiful Flint Sussex farm that you can't see a vehicle or another building. It's just totally isolated. And I said, there's something about this place that is really quite special. Would you be open to us putting forward a master plan for the project? And they said, yeah, why not? We don't really have a workable scheme. So we developed this idea of having artists present, studios there, thinking about how the landscape might interact with artists, and then bringing ecologists, sort of landscape scientists, even agricultural experts in there. So we shaped this project up and thought, this is going to be a 20-year strategic project. We'll do bit by bit. And then the Levelling Up Fund came along, lovely Boris Johnson's Levelling Up Fund, which was sort of 2 weeks to put your proposals in for shovel-ready projects. It was the terminology. And we submitted the project and we were successful. It scored the highest in the Southeast of impact. And so instantly we went from a 20-year project to a 3-year project, and we were delivering a £12 million of investment on this farm site, which is still ongoing and has changed its scope a little bit, and now has a lot of heritage in there as well. So it's sort of crossing over arts, culture, heritage and ecology. And I think it's really exciting, and we're thinking about what that project will be, how you shape it, how is the same model that we've got here, where the Towner brand runs everything in this building, or is it a partnership model? Is it like a village? Is it a new way of working where the brand is less precious and we can be more, we can take more risks with it? Yeah. So, I mean, that project, and you might think, oh God, why are you leaving if this project's so good? I think the thing for me is I've done 5 years with that project, and it is purely sort of my vision, and it's really dear to me, but it's also been a struggle. It's the planning was hellish. We got through that. The further fundraising has been difficult, but we're sort of through those difficult hurdles, and I just think it needs some new energy. It needs somebody new to come in and see it afresh and bring it to life.
Yeah.
But everything I've learned about doing it, I can take to YSP and explore on a bigger scale than's going on there. But I'm getting really excited about how our conversation about our environment and our landscape can interact with arts and culture in a really imaginative way. And it's this word experience that I'm quite excited about. The idea that people are coming in for lots of different experiences and then happening upon things. And interesting, Yorkshire Sculpture Park was always a sort of model in my mind of remembering being a younger person and going up there regularly and sort of happening upon artworks in the landscape, and what effect that had on me, and how it was a great access point to visual arts, I think.
Yeah, such a great development, Joe. I'm curious as to how have you involved artists in your thinking and developing that project? What role have they played in it?
Well, I think, what I have done is take many, many artists there and allowed them to just be in the space and just talked with them about what the ideas, the possibilities, and just help let them feed back on the bits that they feel excited about, don't feel excited about, feel worried about. And that has been an amazing process. So I think everyone we've shown here and more, I've taken up there. I mean, at one point I was up there 3 times a week, taking people around this amazing space and just hearing the bits that excite them, or when they turn and take a breath in. I love those bits where you sort of, you can hear it and you think, okay, that's critical. This is the bit you've had the same reaction to me, and actually, feeling the space, using other people, has helped to shape the thinking about where we go with it. And then this idea that how do you create spaces that are ultimately, I hate the word flexible, but adaptable and usable in many different ways for different functions. If you suddenly have a cross-purpose site, how does that work in terms of what's in the galleries, and how do you not become siloed about that's the art over there and there's some heritage over there and this is all about landscape here, and how do you create a coherent program that interweaves those things successfully? And the way you do it is you use artists to do it. I mean, that's the idea, is to have artists responding to that landscape, and ideally, if the funding is there, to be making work about that landscape in that landscape.
Yes.
Which is always the struggle.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, we look forward to seeing how that develops, and no doubt you're excited to see what's to come. So I can understand how that is now forming your thinking and shaping your thinking to the new role. So I'm curious, this new chapter as director of Yorkshire Sculpture Park, perhaps again for our international listeners, we're in hundreds of countries actually now, Joe. So I wonder if you could just describe the context of Yorkshire Sculpture Park and maybe tell us a little bit about what the opportunity means to you at this point.
So the Yorkshire Sculpture Park is, it's the largest sculpture park in Europe, actually. So it's 500 acres of Yorkshire countryside in West Yorkshire. It surrounds the old Bretton Hall, which was a manor house, and then in its later life was an art school, and had an amazing reputation, particularly for sort of live arts, dance and performance, actually. And out of that art school grew sort of sculptures in the landscape that eventually were opened up for public access. I think it was in the sort of early 80s. And what you've got is a sort of project that has grown in scale dramatically over that time, and new bits of landscape have opened up, and regular sort of programs of artworks installed in the landscape. But then also beautiful gallery buildings and repurposed historic buildings have been made available for indoor exhibitions and projects. And I mean, it's so formative to me as a curator that was sort of coming up from the sort of 2004 onwards into sort of 2010 and watching these spaces open. You know, the Yorkshire Sculpture Park was always this like beacon of ambition when it came to programme, really exciting in the way that they were working with artists in that landscape setting. And obviously I grew up very close to the park, knew it very well, have been able to watch it develop over time, and thought many, many times what I would do with that job. So when it came up, it was one of those, I have to go for this because it's going to be incredible. I mean, the place, everyone who goes there and all the staff there talk about just the sheer opportunity there of what you can do. And in some ways that's quite difficult because there's a lot of directions you could go in with it. But the possibility to really play there and try new things and it has this amazing audience. I mean, it's been up at sort of 600,000 visitors a year and regularly has people coming internationally to see it. I mean, it's a sort of global cultural destination. So there's a lot of weight and a heavy responsibility to keep up the legacy of people that have shaped it. But I think actually it's a great opportunity to build something new for our sector and to try. And there's a few elements of it that really excite me. I mean, the history of the art school and really building into that. They also hold the National Archive of Creative Education at the park. So thinking about how we can build really imaginative, residency programs, thinking about artists, how it helps to shape creative thinking and hopefully policy, education practices. I think that's an area that could be really, really interesting to explore the environment and ecology elements of it. And then also just generally thinking about what the visitor experience is. How can we create amazing experiences in that landscape that are transformative for those people coming in?
Is there an artwork in particular that really resonated with you in your early days that sort of carried through with you?
It's still there.
Yeah.
Is it still there? There's a few, actually. I mean, I always absolutely loved Martin Creed's installation there, which was the iron girders that just get smaller and smaller and smaller. It's such a beautifully simple sculptural piece that used to sit outside the orangery. I'm not sure it's still there anymore, but that was one that I really loved. And then the other one that has always been special to me is actually permanently installed there is Roger Heon's Crystal Room.
Oh, yes.
Which was the London flat that was coated in crystals and then or grown crystals on the walls, and it's now permanently installed at YSP, and you can see it, I think, the first Saturday of the month or every Saturday or something, which is an Arts Council collection piece, which I think, again, is that immersive spatial experience, which so that, I mean, those two do really, really excite me. But I've seen so much there that has been brilliant over the years. And I think I saw Rachel White-Reed show up at the Longside Gallery, a really early show of hers when they first opened that space, which was really quite beautiful with the context of the valley in the background. But yeah, I mean, getting my head around a much bigger institution is going to be interesting, and thinking on a scale that, I haven't been able to think about.
Yeah. There's something
fascinating.
As you've been talking, there's something about your exploration of the senses in a wider way that it affords you the opportunity to really think about that sensorial exploration for visitors. So not just kind of the passive consumption of a sculpture plonked in a landscape, as it were. Yeah, not that that's how we experience it, but that actually that kind of relationship between the subject, object, landscape, there's a lot more opportunity there to unpack that with an audience. And I wonder, from my knowledge of Yorkshire Sculpture Park of old, it's always had quite an interesting funding model. I mean, really, I found it very interesting compared to other organisations. I know you won't go into specifics, but could you tell us a little bit about your understanding of where that is at the moment?
It's got Arts Council investment in it. It doesn't actually have a huge amount of local authority investment, although there is a little bit there. A lot of that is in terms of access to the land, because a lot of the land, I believe, is still owned by Wakefield Council. In terms of funding, now it's a ticketed model, so there is a lot of sort of ticket income coming through the door. But I suppose there's been a long relationship over 50 years. I think it's going to be 50 years old in 2027. With artists and foundations who have continued to support it. So there's a lot of relationships to pick up on that have been, you've had a director there that was there for 45 years who built it up from the beginning. It's quite an interesting to come into that, where all those relationships have helped to fund and support the organisation, and having to pick up all those relationships and carry them on, or make new ones, think about new funding models and how we might be innovative with building a sustainable future for it. But is that what you were referring to? Or?
Yeah, I think I was also quite surprised because there were more relationships with patrons and collectors and sales,
commercial galleries,
and commercial galleries, from the early days. And it's much more common these days, institutions kind of develop that. But actually the sales potential, I think from an artist point of view, there's a huge perhaps lack of knowledge, but also because there's a lack of knowledge, there's a lack of opportunity, that actually for artists to understand firstly what it's like to make art in the public realm, there's and the sort of understanding of how that works, because it's how complex it is, but also then what happens to the work, so how it's either accessioned or deaccessioned, or how it gets collected, but then also if it gets bought, the process of buying. And I think there's because there's a huge change in the commercial gallery sector at the moment. I think there's a huge opportunity there for Yorkshire Sculpture Park, frankly, in terms of that relationship for the artist, the collector, the patron, the supporter, the educator. Yeah. What is it to own for an institution or with an institution, as well as an individual, if you like? I
mean, absolutely. I think that relationship has been cemented there for quite a long time, that maybe hasn't been in other public institutions.
That's right.
And I think part of that comes down to the sheer practicalities around operating with large-scale sculpture. The costs are phenomenal, and actually. And that's a danger as well for that institution as well, because it ends up being that you can only work with a number of galleries that are able to support the ambition of the scale of work that you may want to programme there. And I think one of the tasks for me is to think about, in this new climate, YSP has always championed itself as an international programmer in a way that is, in sometimes at odds with the economic climate of the time. And now the idea of shipping large-scale sculpture around the globe for a single project for 6 months, it's almost unfeasible. But I think, finding a way in which the programme can keep an international connection whilst it's also more nimble and able to work with different stages of artists and different ranges of artists and commercial partners, is the bit that really excites me. So I think finding the park has got a great opportunity, because as you say, there is this interest in acquiring work, but then there's also the conscious, if we're being honest, there's a storage cost around large scale work. Yeah. And therefore, the park has benefited from collectors who have loaned work on long term to the park, which enriches the programme. And that is a brilliant, as you say, opportunity for YSP. And is there a new way to think about acquiring work to a collector that then also is in partnership with an institution, I think that would be really exciting to develop. Whilst at the same time, I think finding those access points for artists at all stages to the YSP program, I think, is really important.
That's right.
So how do we use the gallery spaces maybe more strategically? I mean, one thing, I mean, I'm probably speaking slightly out of turn, but I'll go there, was, you know, there's a very large set of galleries next to the main visitor centre. And one thing that was imagined in the development of those was that you would work with artists that can work inside and outside. And so you would have an exhibition in the galleries that would spill out into the public space outside the galleries. Well, that limits you enormously to a range of artists that can do that. You know, but when you're talking about sculpture in the widest sense, then you are limiting yourself to artists that can and do work outside and work inside. And it also adds huge costs to those projects because you're citing sculpture in the landscape and you're doing a large scale project. So can we think about a way in which maybe we don't have that restriction on us and we are thinking about the sort of work that only exists inside? And then the park, then that allows capacity and space to think more about the park and how that plays a different experiential role. And maybe that's a different approach curatorially. So I think for me, I feel confident in one thing that we've done at Towner, and it has taken 8 years to get there, is to understand the rhythm of the building and to understand what a balanced program feels like. So, you know, where we are thinking about lots of different audiences and where their point of entry is. So is it, because we've recently put together a permanent space to the work of Eric Ravilius. You know, we hold the largest collection of his work, hugely popular with audience members. And we'd resisted that for a while, I think, but actually embracing the idea that Ravilius is a key character in Eastbourne and on the South Coast, and he can help bring audiences to the institution that then we can show in another space a more emerging contemporary program. And then we have our ticketed program on the top floor, which is doing something slightly different for the organisation. And what we've become attuned to, it's like tuning a radio, isn't it? It's like, how do we tune the building to meet the strategy and to understand what the strategic priorities are? So the same thing with YSP. It's like, how do we tune all of the spaces and the park and everything to do what we need it to do in terms of the people that we want to come and see what we do and how we access them? And so there's lots of questions there about, you know, who are we focused on? Can we be focused on lots of different audiences at the same time? And how do we do that? So I think that's quite an interesting one to unpack.
Fantastic. Is there an opportunity, you think, for how you might support artists differently at Yorkshire Sculpture Park?
Well, I mean, what I do think they have done very well there and do, I mean, the team is amazing. You know, the curatorial technical team at YSP are absolutely some of the best. And helping to get some of those skills more widely available into the sector would be really exciting, I think. Thinking about, so I visited recently and they were working with an artist who's just opened actually the Western and developing the work in the workshops at the top, and it was fantastic to see such support from the technical team around the artist and actually helping to shape the work and give the space for her to develop the work at the site. And I think that's a bit that the public don't see about YSP, is that actually they are very active in providing the space to make work on site. I think similarly, the chapel installation by Nicola Turner that's opening next week is made on site, developed from the wool, from the sheep that are in the landscape. And I think is quite impressive, but I don't think it's particularly transparent at the moment, that process that they're going through. But can that be opened up to more artists and a whole range of artists is probably an interesting question about how we prioritize different development opportunities. And I mean, for me, I think making's a really important part of cultural institutions. So, and also the legacy of having an art school at the middle of your site. Actually, can we do something really exciting and different around artists being there and making regularly? And what point, if at all, do the public know about that or access it or see it?
I think it's an important point. So thinking about my own time at Somerset House, for example, where we had artists in studios there and creating work, in the studios, and then also connecting the programme. Every aspect of the programme across the whole of Somerset House, we ended up publishing artist work that was produced on site. And I think it's not just that, obviously, that it's like a kind of a creative factory, if you like, that's being publishing contemporary content that's being made there, but actually it changes the thinking of the people who work there. And I think that actually that was fundamental to, the marketing team, the kind of operations team, the kind of the fundraising team. Everybody sort of got to know artists in a very different way. And I think that sort of that inside out rather than sort of outside in, I think is a really exciting place to be.
I totally agree. And I think that was one of the big visions around Black Robin Farm, was that we wanted artists to be on site and there and actually making work. That was a really important part of the vision, was that the studio is a really important element. And how does that feed everything? You say the whole team. And I think that is something that YSP can think about. Because, I mean, when I went into the space, and it's Lisa Vandy's exhibition at the Western, it's well worth going to see if you get a chance. And actually, I heard her on the radio on Woman's Hour this morning as I was driving into work. And it's a great little piece on Woman's Hour about the work itself and how she made it at Yorkshire Sculpture Park. So do have a listen. Woman's Hour on Radio 4, on BBC Radio 4. And that process of sort of seeing it was really quite enlightening for me as an incoming director, to walk into an artist feeling supported, having a technical team around them, helping them to make the work, having this enormous warehouse right up on the hill to do it in as well, to make this work in, and somewhere to live on site. I mean, it felt great. And I don't know how many of the YSB team had been up and talked to her and experienced that, because it was miles away from the main offices. So you're absolutely right. How do artists play a role? And it comes back to the conversation earlier about, we're going to bring artists in and we have to trust them. There's that thing of trust the creative process. And you used to hear rumours about the mayor of Chicago having an artist as a main advisor, and all these nice sort of tidbit stories about where artists have played key roles in shaping strategy or shaping political direction and things. So, yeah, it's a really nice idea to have, maybe as we're starting to think about where we go with the organisation next, we could involve some artists in that process. Could be quite exciting, couldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So as we draw to a close, I'm curious, Joe, because obviously these are huge undertakings, these roles that you're in, and obviously you're responsible for a lot of people, not just artists, but your team. I'm wondering, who helps you think clearly? We know that leadership can be quite solitary, and wondering who helps you stretch your thinking and pull you out of the weeds of day to day.
Well, and the one thing I try and do as much as I can is still go to artist studios, strangely, because it really grounds you, actually. And sometimes it's really hard to find the time to do it. It's sort of a real strain to find that diary time to go to see an artist in the studio, or to meet them at an exhibition they've got if we're working with them. But when you come away after 2 hours or 3 hours with them, you feel totally different and really energized, and you can think completely differently about some of the problems you might have gone in there with. so I try and do that as much as I possibly can. I lean back on colleagues from the past a lot as well. So I mean, Jenny Lomax was a fantastic director to work under at Camden Arts Centre, and she was here yesterday. Actually, had lunch with her, and she's often somebody I'll call up and ask about and talk to her about. And you do need a sort of group of people that, and actually close by. I'm very close with fellow directors like Stuart Drew at the Delaware Pavilion and Nathaniel at Charleston up the road, and we have regularly talk every few days where we can just vent and say, "Oh my God, I believe this." And it is a point about leadership networks, because I chair Culture East Sussex. Well, I don't anymore, but I did chair Culture East Sussex, which is a sort of strategic development board for the county for culture. And we went through a big governance refresh there, which went from all the leaders of the cultural organisations in a room to a much broader spectrum of freelancers, artists, which has been fantastic for thinking strategically about where the direction goes. But what we have lost is that safe space for leaders to sort of just be honest about where the organisation is, the struggles they've got, because suddenly you're sat in a room with members, donors, audience members, stakeholders, councillors. And that's a very different conversation to being with fellow leaders and being able to say, "Oh my God, how are you handling this? This is awful." Or, "I have this HR problem here. What would you do?" And, that sort of being able to be free. And I think we've got to protect those spaces a bit as cultural leaders, to be able to just be honest in a room with fellow people that are experiencing exactly the same thing.
Yeah, I think that sort of psychological safety where you can be vulnerable is important for everybody, right? So you clearly provide it for artists and your staff. But I think also because there's so much at stake for cultural leaders right now, I think that's where, super, super helpful to know that there are people that you can talk to and vent, like you say, but also stretch thinking. So with that in mind, you won't have much time, I dare say, right now, Joe, but are you reading, watching or listening to anything that's feeding your work?
Oh, that question is, we've recently had twins as well in October.
Oh, congratulations. So, I did not know that.
We now have 4 children, which is all under 7, which is proving to be... So I'm actually reading... The only thing I am reading is the history of Bretton Hall at the moment, which is sort of me trying to get into the research, but I'm even failing at that miserably. But so between this job, thinking about the new job, and the twins, I have very little time for anything else, sadly. That will change.
It will.
And hopefully we'll get better. But sadly, I can't give you anything amazing and inspiring right now.
Oh, do you know, I think, building a family alongside everything else you're doing is inspiring and exciting. So I think that's plenty. Yeah. I'm curious.
I'm reading a lot of children's books,
What's one thing you'd change about the art world, Joe, if you could?
I think it's got to be about providing space for that expanded thinking. I think, the time and the resources to do it, because we can't innovate as a sector if we don't have the time. Well, there's 2 things. One is the time to really think about it, travel, experience different things, and genuinely think differently, meet other people that are doing things. And then it's the ability to take risks. Everything's so much on the knife edge at the moment that risk is a really dirty word in our sector. And I think that's a real shame. We're not allowed to fail, because if we fail, everything falls down. So I think we have to create some breathing room to fail, because then we can innovate, we can test things, and we can fail, and not everything's at stake. So I think failure is really important. And if we don't have the space to do it without losing our job or losing the charity, or, then that's going to be a really not a particularly interesting place to work.
Yeah, I love that. I also personally don't believe in failure, Joe. I have to... And I think it's all learning, isn't it? But I do commit to risk, and I think it's an important part of the creative process for artists and leaders. So I 100% agree with you. And here's to all the risks that you've taken so far, Joe. On behalf of artists and all of us in the cultural sector, I think you're clearly waving the flag for us, which is really exciting to see what you're going to do next. So how can listeners stay connected with you and what follows and unfolds at Yorkshire Sculpture Park?
Yeah, well, I think you can follow Yorkshire Sculpture Park on all the usual platforms. If you just Google it or search on social media, it's there, and it's got fantastic coverage from brilliant comms team there. And keep an eye on that. And you can follow me if you want to be. I'm Joe_Hill_Joe, I think, on Instagram. And do reach out to me if you've got comments. I try and reply to anybody that does just sort of reach out to me directly. And come and see us in Yorkshire as well. Come and explore the 500 acres of amazing parkland and enjoy it.
Can't wait. Thank you so much for your time and your energy, Joe, and enjoy the last 2 weeks at Towner.
Thank you.
See you in Yorkshire. Listening to Joe, what lingers is this quiet but insistent idea that great institutions aren't built on perfection. They're built on permission. Permission for artists to be themselves and develop the work they want to make for that particular context. Permission for audiences to feel ownership, not distance. Permission for leaders to take risks even when the stakes feel uncomfortably high. There's a moment he shares about Lotar's artwork that was never graffitied, never damaged, not because it was protected, but because it was loved. That tells you everything. When people feel something is theirs, they take care of it. And maybe that's the deeper invitation here, to stop overcomplicating what needs to be clear. Joe also reminds us that if the sector wants to evolve, it has to make room for thinking time and risk. Without that breathing space, innovation stalls. And frankly, things get a bit dull. So as you leave this episode, consider this. Where in your work are you over-engineering when simplicity might land harder? Where are you playing it safe when a little risk might open something new? And what would it look like to create something people don't just see but feel is theirs? As ever, if this conversation gave you something to think about, please pass it on. Share it with someone who's building, questioning, or quietly reimagining the spaces around them. And please don't forget to follow, rate and review the podcast. It helps us keep these conversations going. Thanks for listening. Until next time.